Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Aaron.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. Chicago is reeling after a sudden escalation in deadly violence. Over the 4th of July weekend, the biggest fireworks came from the guns of gangbangers. Scores of people were shot and more than a dozen people killed. While the ongoing bloodshed is threatening the political ambitions of Chicago's mayor, the residents there don't really care about that. They just want the shooting to stop. Dale Hurd has the story.
We've got to come together to stop this. This is too much.
82 people shot from last Thursday through Monday morning, 14 dead, and a mayor trying to regain control of America's third largest city.
We're one city with one future and one point. Put the guns down.
Tanya Gunn was killed while barbecuing in a park with her family and friends.
And then the ambulance came and they took her and they shot her in front of her daughter.
City officials are trying to console themselves that fewer Chicagoans have died in gun violence this year over last year, even though the number of shootings is way up.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Groundhog Day here in Chicago.
Chicago Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy, frustrated that the killings continue, says the problem is weak gun laws, even though the fact is that Chicago already has some of the toughest gun laws in the nation.
Everybody asks me what's different about New York and Chicago. I can tell you very simply, the proliferation of firearms.
Even with Chicago's tough gun sales and possession ordinances, officials think Illinois needs even stiffer penalties for people who violate gun laws. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
President Obama is asking Congress for $2 billion today to deal with the flood of Latin American children illegally crossing into the U.S. Meanwhile, there's growing frustration among Texas churches that want to help those children. As Heather Sells reports, they're waiting to hear just how the federal government will use them, and they're hoping that they'll soon be able to minister directly to these kids.
Many Texas churches have known for months about the tidal wave of immigrant children crossing the border. Already this year, Border Patrol agents have detained more than 50,000.
Children as young as 6 are crossing the border here on their own, spurred on in many cases by parents who fear for their lives back home in Central America.
At their annual state meeting this month, Hispanic Baptist leaders took time out to pray at the border. Their concern, the safety and salvation of these kids. Their frustration, no way to connect with or minister to them. The hope that ongoing conversation with the White House will lead to that access.
We have an army of chaplains. We have an army of disaster relief trained people. We have an army of children's ministers and leaders who have background checks who are ready.
In the border town of McAllen, Pastor Chad Mason works the phones daily, trying to find ways to help these children and fielding calls from churches that want to help. He knows firsthand the need because many Border Patrol agents worship at his church.
They tell us the stories of kids who are in their care, who are traumatized from what they've seen, or they're incredibly impoverished. And you just wonder, well, how are you dealing with that? Because we know the Border Patrol is not designed to be a child care facility.
Right now, Border Patrol agents are detaining kids for as many as 14 days, a condition human rights activists say is unacceptable. By law, however, agents cannot quickly return children from Central America back to their home countries. They must screen them as potential trafficking victims or refugees. That leaves thousands of kids stranded in Border Patrol stations for days, and after that, in Health and Human Service facilities for possibly months.
That's what breaks our hearts. We know that there's a need. And at this point, we have no access to try to care for that need.
One way that churches right now are helping is by simply doing laundry. This bedding here is for women and children who are just coming from Border Patrol stations and are about to head out on buses to wherever their destination is.
The Border Patrol releases immigrant women with their children at bus stations across South Texas. With their deportation hearings months away, they're free to go for now, though by some estimates, huge numbers of them will never show up. Calvary Baptist and other churches are working with Catholic charities in McAllen and Brownsville to care for these families. They're often in dire need of food, medical care, and clean clothes.
We don't foresee this ending anytime very soon.
This week, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference has begun to work with Latin American churches to urge parents not to send their children to the United States. The goal, reduce the number of unaccompanied children at the border to 0 by year's end. In the meantime, Texas churches are standing by, ready to help those who do decide to come.
In the future, we'll have to figure out what's right, what's wrong, and those kinds of things. But biblically, we're going to love people right now. We need to share that love and compassion to those who need it the most.
And Heather has just returned from the U.S.-Mexico border and joins us now. Heartbreaking all the way around. So Heather, what's going to happen to all these kids in the coming months?
Well, right now, as I was mentioning in the story, they're in these Border Patrol stations and they're only supposed to stay for 72 hours by law, but it's going to 14 days in some cases. So they're looking at temporary facilities in Texas and other states, and they're hoping that the church will encourage communities to welcome these kids and not give the pushback like they did in California last week.
Yeah, we're seeing those protests. Many people want to know, why not just send these kids right back where they came from?
Well, if they are Mexican, they can't send them right back. But if they're from Central America, they need to go before an immigration judge. That judge needs to determine, are they a trafficking victim, or perhaps are they victims of gang violence and they do qualify for asylum? They could be considered a refugee. So there is a legal process that needs to take place, and that, of course, takes time.
Now, once the churches get the green light, how may they be able to help these kids?
It's interesting because there are groups like Texas Baptist Men, they're humanitarian relief groups, their volunteers have background checks, they're trained, and they can go in and physically help these kids and provide spiritual counsel. And so, of course, that is what they are hoping to do.
Yeah, we're both parents. Many people find this hard to understand. Why do parents send their kids across the border?
Right. Well, there's a couple of factors that have come together. And one is a lot of parents, of course, have thought for years, could I get my kid away from these terrible conditions where we live? Or parents in the U.S., could I bring my child who's living with grandma in Latin America to me? And they started hearing that the policies were a little more relaxed, and they said now is the time. So kind of a combination of factors. But what's interesting is that Samuel Rodriguez, the president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, said this week, hey, you know what? They could come here and get involved in drug gangs here as well. So parents, please do not send your kids.
Raises yet more concerns. What can people do who'd like to help these children?
Well, there are practical needs, as you were seeing, clothing, just money to help buy food and other such things. So there is a website. It is the South Texas, I think we're putting it up on the screen here. You can see it, the southtexasrefugees.org website, and it's a lot of faith groups and the Salvation Army, et cetera, that are listing the practical needs and the updates on this website.
Excellent reporting. Thank you so much, Heather.
Recreational marijuana is legal in Washington state starting today. This comes 2 years after the state voted to legalize marijuana sales for anyone over 21. Only about 20 stores in the entire state were given permits to sell, and they're hoping that they're ready for the push and the rush of customers.
This whole past week, we've been working 12 to 15 hours a day. I hear that there's about 500 pounds for the whole state, and that means there's going to be shortages for people.
There could be anywhere up to 10,000 people here. There will be cops out on the streets looking for those people that are just too excited to wait till they get home.
Over in Colorado, the legal pot business has brought in $11 million in taxes since shops opened in January, while Washington and Colorado now allow stores to sell marijuana. Using the drug is still a violation of federal law.
Segments of our country are recovering from violent storms that hit Monday. There were tornado warnings for a large swath of Massachusetts where the fast-moving storms uprooted trees and downed power lines in several communities. Those downed wires sparked a fire in one of the hardest-hit areas. Residents in Michigan are cleaning up following storms that moved through parts of that state. Strong winds uprooted trees and knocked them into homes and onto power lines in Kentwood. The damage left many people stunned.
Stuff that you see maybe once every 10, 15 years, unless you're on the coast looking at hurricane damage. We're getting structures uncovered so insurance companies can do their work.
In Iowa, a calm holiday weekend quickly turned turbulent. Tornadoes damaged homes and uprooted trees about 20 miles southwest of Waterloo.
Israel launched Operation Protective Edge against Hamas overnight, striking back at 50 terrorist positions. The goal is to stop the increased rocket attacks which Israeli citizens have endured for weeks. Israel also came up with some of its army reserves. And as Chris Mitchell reports, many from Israel's border with Gaza, the situation could escalate.
Over the past few weeks, more than 200 rockets have slammed into southern Israel from Gaza. Sirens have been heard in Tel Aviv and near Jerusalem. That puts nearly 2 million Israelis in rocket range. The front line of this battle is Gaza City. We can hear right now the IAF is striking targets here in Gaza City. That's where many of the rockets from Hamas have been fired from. And now you can see the plume of smoke in the distance where they're responding. Israel says it's hit dozens of Hamas targets to stop the rockets into Israel. For Israelis living under the shadow of these attacks, it can be terrifying.
Even when everything seems to be quiet, you have to be ready from your inside that maybe in a couple of minutes you will hear the alarm, and then you have 10 seconds to save your life, to run to a shelter, and it's crazy.
We definitely expect this to escalate. We should be expecting today sirens going off, I would say, in Tel Aviv region.
Noam Badin of the Sderot Media Center says there's a major difference between the way Hamas fires its rockets and how Israel responds.
Hamas are firing these rockets towards the civilian populations in the western Negev or Israeli population in southern Israel. When Israel tries to retaliate, it uses the most advanced technology and air forces with the purpose to pinpoint that target itself in Gaza, never the population.
Israel's Air Force commander estimates Hamas has fired 97% of their rockets out of population centers. Israel says its actions are justified.
At present, with the range of their rockets improving, Hamas has managed to force 1 million Israelis into shelters. The government of Israel will not tolerate that situation continuing.
The U.S. State Department said Israel has the right to defend itself, and we certainly support that.
There is no country in the world that will tolerate even one rocket being fired towards a territory.
From this vantage point, you can watch Hamas fire its rockets and then see the Israeli Air Force strike back. The concern for many is that this is the front lines of what could be a much wider confrontation. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, on the Israeli-Gaza border.
The world's biggest oil producer is not Saudi Arabia or any other Middle Eastern country. It's the United States. The U.S. has taken over the #1 position, according to a report from Bank of America. A bank analyst tells Bloomberg News the shale oil boom is playing a key role, and if the U.S. didn't have this energy supply, prices at the pump would be unaffordable. One key reason for the increase in U.S. energy is fracking, which brings oil out of shale rock formations. But many environmentalists oppose fracking and are trying to stop it by regulations in some towns.
Coming up, an apology from the Pope. But did he go far enough to heal the wounds in the Catholic Church?
Pope Francis is asking forgiveness from the victims of sexual abuse at the hands of Catholic clergy, and he's vowing to hold bishops accountable for the protection of minors. The pledge came as the Pope met for the first time with 6 victims of the abuse and held a special mass for them. But other victims who were not at the meeting were critical of it.
To me, it's a PR move. I hope that the victims that he met with, I hope they find healing. And, it was very brave of them to meet with them. But the meeting today isn't going to protect a child. And that's what we need to do.
During his homily, the Pope did not spell out just how he would hold bishops accountable and whether that would include firing bishops and other church leaders.
The U.S. is urging China to release a Christian pastor who was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Zhang Xiaoji was convicted of fraud and gathering crowds to disturb the public order. His lawyer says Zhang's church had been in a dispute with local authorities over land for a new building. A U.S. State Department spokeswoman says Zhang was prosecuted in retaliation for peaceful advocacy on behalf of his church, and that China should release the pastor and stop harassing his family and congregants. The State Department also said Chinese officials should allow citizens to worship freely.
India's Supreme Court has ruled Islamic courts in their country have no legal authority, and people are not bound by any of their decrees. In 2005, a petition was filed in the country's highest court saying Muslim groups were running a parallel judicial system. Judge C.K. Prasad said, quote, "No religion is allowed to curb anyone's fundamental rights. According to the ruling, Muslims may choose to abide by Sharia law if they wish, but people cannot be legally forced to do so." India is a predominantly Hindu country with a large Muslim minority.
Up next, Americans fleeing cities and suburbs and moving to the Pacific Northwest. We'll take a look at the movement called the American Redoubt after this. What if you really could get away from it all and move to a place where you and your family felt safe and could really enjoy life? Well, that's just what some conservative Christians are doing.
They are so worried about the future of America, they've gone to the American Redoubt. The word redoubt means fortress or a safe, protected place. Chuck Holton has their story from Idaho.
We have a breaking news.
Angry protesters are on the streets of Los Angeles right now.
Alarm over the future of America can be seen almost daily in the headlines. The loss of privacy, constitutional freedoms, and out-of-control government spending are just a few of the reasons sending shockwaves across the country.
Christian bakers in Oregon.
Religious persecution is on the rise, and that's leading many believers to look beyond the ballot box and start voting with their feet. Dave Westbrook moved his family out of the city 12 years ago.
I was pastoring a city church, and it was through my own Bible study and my own prayer life that I became convicted that I needed to do something. We needed to live in a different situation.
The area he chose is attracting more and more like-minded families every year, the Inland Pacific Northwest. It's an area which includes Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and the eastern parts of Washington and Oregon. Members call this movement the American Redoubt.
Ultimately, we believe God led us to the Northwest. I think that people recognize tough times are coming, and it's causing them to think about their situation. It's causing them to think about how they live now, the security of their family, the stability of society, and how they're going to relate to that. But I'm finding something else too, and that is that more and more people are resonating with this idea of getting back to the land, of living a simple, more natural way. And I mean, that doesn't surprise me, because the way I see it, the Creator wired us for this.
Idaho is a paradise for nature lovers of all kinds, and it's also one of the least populous states in the Union. And that's a big draw for the kind of people that would come to the American Redoubt, not necessarily because they want to get away from everybody, but just because they feel like it's more free for them to live and work and worship as they please.
Where your kids can run free. They're spending time with, livestock, with the horses. They're in the garden.
We saw how quickly things deteriorated.
John and Sarah enjoyed life in Florida until a hurricane changed their outlook forever. They asked we not show their faces.
How fragile our civilization is. And I witnessed people get into fistfights over bags of ice. And I realized that if things were to get worse in this country, I need to be someplace safe, out of the big cities.
The couple invested their life savings and recently moved to the American Redoubt. And so far, they're very happy with their choice.
So right now I can say I'm excited about the new challenges and the new life that we're going to embrace, that we have embraced, that we were prepared and ready to face. What challenges are coming our way, I don't know, but I know that God brought us here and God's going to bring us through any troubles that we do have.
Welcome, and thanks for listening to Radio Free Redoubt, the emerging safe haven and refuge for God-fearing, liberty-loving.
The growth here has spawned radio programs, websites, and even its own silver coins. Todd Savage moved his real estate business from San Francisco and now helps people looking to make the move.
The core of this movement is to help like-minded conservative Christians move to the Redoubt area, to eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana, and sometimes Wyoming. And it's a wonderful place to be, to educate your children and to have freedom. Since the re-election of President Obama, we've seen a huge increase in demand.
But it's not about being exclusive. It's about liberty.
The American Redoubt is meant for freedom-loving folks that are accepting of everyone, regardless of their religious preferences, their skin color, even though predominantly they're conservative Christians coming here of all races, colors, and creeds.
And it's not just families. Businesses are moving in as well. One notable growth industry, gun and ammo manufacturers driven out of other states by restrictive gun legislation. There are now 180 in Idaho alone. But Dave Westbrook asserts the biggest draw is spiritual.
But the environment is just so much more conducive, and I think particularly it's so much more conducive to our spiritual walk with God. And that's, for us, for my family, that's the number one reason why we did this, because it was a way of life.
From Northern Idaho, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Finally today, Operation Blessing is helping flood victims in Pensacola, Florida, return home.
Back in May, Pensacola was hit by some of the heaviest rain in more than 100 years. Floodwaters damaged the interior of Marjorie's home and destroyed many of her family's belongings. Operation Blessing helped remove water-damaged drywall, provided and installed new cabinets and appliances, and even brought new furniture for her twins' bedroom.
That's right, and you can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to their website at ob.org. Well, that's going to do it now for CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a terrific Tuesday, everybody.